I want to take a moment now to introduce Anissa. Anissa is out of Panama, and I had the pleasure, my wife and I, Liz and I, to meet Anissa probably about a decade ago, where with her daughters we traveled to Panama, and we had the opportunity to have boots on the ground on an orphanage. It was an all-girl orphanage where I was educated as it pertains to the life that these children have. And if you tie it to today's world, as like if you look at the world Sound of Freedom, for example, the movie, which highlighted that child trafficking, the trafficking of body parts, whether it's for sexuality, for body parts, the grotesque of it is the second biggest industry in the world. And there's a few things that highlighted them when I was listening to the actual CIA agency, the individuals that were like mercenaries, boots on the ground, that they talk about. And one of the things they talk about was that whether it's war, whether it's natural disasters, that's when the groomers move in. That's when the child traffickers move in. That's when they go and steal children, ending up being the second biggest industry in the world. And when we were in Panama, there's a couple of things that always stuck with me. Is one, there was a child, for example, that had children, I believe, from her grandfather and her father. There was other cases where he talked about how these young ladies, they're very young age, they sit on city buses because all countries like Panama, you have your inclement weathers, right? Your inclement weather is 4 months of rain, or we'll have 4 months of snow, right? But it's still inclement weather, and they look for shelters, and these girls were taking shelter to these city buses operated by government employees who were being groomed, right? So I want to give the ball in your court, and because I know you did a lot of work. Not only I believe you grew up in an orphanage, you also gave back and became boots on the ground and helped and volunteered and so forth. So that's what I want to talk about, Anissa. If you want to take a lead on this, and it's to educate the world, like the movies like Sound of Freedom are unfortunately they are real situations that children get pulled and stolen into what we have to they have to endure.
Yes, definitely. I just want to clarify a couple of points that you made prior. When I'm talking about the orphanage, we're talking about an orphanage back in the 1980s, right? So the bus system wasn't necessarily government. It was not government ran. It was privately ran. They, for example, we can start with the bus drivers. Um, After coming back to Panama in 2006, I reached out to a lot of the girls that I was in the orphanage with. And I noticed a lot of them had kids and they would say, oh, this child's father is this public transportation. Um, Remember this, we'll just throw out a name, John. He used to drive the bus, and he had the red feathers hanging. They decorate the buses. They used to decorate the buses. And I'm no. And then, oh, and this one's father was the guy that cut the yard at the orphanage. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was adopted, right? So I was able to leave the orphanage at 10. I was adopted by American citizens and taken out of the orphanage. But prior to that, we would get on the buses, and they were nice to us. Sometimes they wouldn't charge us a fare, and that's how it started, right? Um, we were not fed by the orphanage. So hunger played a huge key in this, right? Survival instincts. And that is what the predators look for, they wouldn't charge you a fare. Then they would have some cookies that they would give you, or they would give you a notebook, or, something that a young child would like, right? And so as a child in a war-torn country, in an orphanage, or as a child out there on our own, we feel this is love, right? Because we don't have an example of healthy love. And we'll get to that in a minute with my father that adopted me. I was petrified of him, and he never did anything. But it was all the other things that led up to this, right? To this day here in Panama, KFC sells an empanada with cheese in it. I cannot smell that or eat it because my uncles wouldn't feed me unless I performed oral sex on them or I did something. And then they would give us these empanadas because they wouldn't feed us. So that's how they started. And then it just got to be, I have to do this to eat. So then you did it, right? And then once I told my maternal grandfather that this was happening with his sons, he put my sister and I in an orphanage. Um, and then I felt, okay, I'm away from them and maybe this will be better for me. I remember being excited about them having a goat, right? So my sister and I are in an orphanage now, and we had military that was here back in the 80s, and they would come up for weekends and holidays, and then they would take girls out of the orphanage to spend Christmas, whatever holidays, summer holidays, just maybe weekends with families. And we would come back and we would say the father, the son, or somebody touched us or did something or had us put their penis in their mouth. A lot of times that's a safe way for them to go because that's not detectable where maybe penetration is. And it was a lot of oral sex contact, right? And we would come back and we would say, hey, this person did this to me, or this person did that to me. And you would have everything that family might have given you taken away from you and locked in a closet until you said that it was a lie, right? And a lot of us just stopped telling because we were looking to escape from the orphanage because they wouldn't feed us there either. The orphanage, huge grooming. One time there was somebody that came to replace another person, and I I said to her I was touched sexually, and she goes, "Well, you weren't penetrated, right?" And I'm like, "No." And so that was okay, but the fact that he put something into my vagina or stuff like that, they didn't want to hear that. They would make excuses. Why are you lying? You're just doing this to get attention. That was a big thing, in the early 80s. You're lying for this, you're lying for that. um and it was all the time with almost all the girls, and we would just tell each other, and some of us would hide when certain families would come because we knew that this was going on. And we didn't want to go out with that family or this family. Our new family would come, and then all of us would want to go with them until one of us came back and was like, that man, he did this and that to me. You know, just stuff like that constantly, holding
You
things
know,
over our head. Mhm.
and I remember Anissa going there with and again it was with Liz, my wife, and daughters, my Leneva, and then I remember how apprehensive the girls were of all of us, right?
Yeah.
Of all of us, and it was Christmas time, and we had made all these bags, and I read eyes and I read faces really well, and it's my background and my upbringing in the hood, and but I remember seeing their faces, right, and that like you go to and I'm not even going to use normal, but a normal upbringing, and you walk in with bags of Christmas of everything, and you would have the joy and all that. And I remember seeing the apprehension. So it's that came from, there you could take and I use the analogy without comparing here, but you could take a Rottweiler, you could take a pit bull, and you can raise him with love and raise her with love and attention and commands and kindness and everything and rules and regulation, but for like social skills, or you can beat it, you can mistreat it, you can abuse it, you can, right? Two different, complete, same animal, same DNA, same bloodline, completely different. And that's what that was.
Mhm.
Those they're so scarred that it was Christmas time. You have individuals that came in with love and with, and I know, and you shake your head because right?
Yeah, we don't recognize love. And I mean, I I still struggle with that. I'm going to be 53 November 15th. And, I still don't feel worthy of Vanessa's love because Vanessa is my daughter. She's 31. And so it's something that, like you said, um, this is how we've been raised. And we have, we develop a callus around ourselves, and, we feel unworthy. We feel like we did something to provoke it, even though I can sit here and have a conversation with you and say, I know I didn't do anything to provoke it. But when I'm quiet and it's me and me, I still doubt, like, did I do something? Was I too affectionate? Did I look promiscuous? Because when I had to tell the family that adopted me what happened after I had a bicycle accident, my uncles used to burn me with cigarettes. And so once I got into that accident, my parents took me to a clinic, and they were like, "Who did this to you?" And I told them. And my parents, they come from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Roanoke, Indiana. And when I told the doctors this up at the clinic, um, they didn't believe me either. And I imagine that if you haven't lived this, and back in the 80s, you don't want to air out your dirty laundry. I probably would have had a hard time if a 10-year-old is telling me that, she's been sexually molested by every other man in her life. So it's a conditioning, and you never get rid of it. You can't shower enough. You can't, I've searched in religion to try to get rid of this feeling. I've looked everywhere. And it doesn't go away ever.
A few things you talked about there, and makes me think about, I worked at correctional system, detention centers, treatment centers. I work with young offenders, females, males, murderers, like the individuals that were rape or rape victims and rapers, that kind of stuff. And the big word of trans today. Well, I was working with trans back in the 90s, right, as an inmate snap. And I remember, I mentioned Ledbury is a neighborhood that in Ottawa, it's not known as a very nice area to live in. And I grew up in that, and I remember working the meal line in a correctional center, and there was a long line of inmates, and this one inmate who recognized me, and from the Ledbury days, and he asked me the question, "How did you get out?" And my answer was, I had a strong foundation. Right. That was my answer to him. And when I look at, we did work also, like Liz and I and the girls have done work with different parts of the world, and without naming all the parts we did, and a charity work, and that we did an orphanage, and it wasn't an orphanage, it was in Uruguay. It was a church of children with no parents, no families. And I was my brother-in-law's family and a sister-in-law's family, and again, the same look on their faces. All these children, say, I think it might have been 50 children in those families, and that the same apprehension you talk about, that I don't deserve love, and that fear, and that wall, and it's you're there to give and help, and we had raised a lot of stuff, and I was in Mexico. My daughters after the hurricane, and we did a whole couple of days with them, and we, with this group, and the UPS was behind helping us with this one friend of ours, and I remember leaving that night. It was, a lot of the people lost everything, so they were boarded up, middle of desert, shanty towns, no power, no water, nothing. So we bought food and clothing, water, and everything. And that one night we were leaving, and in the forefront, it was the nighttime was coming up, and then the sunset was going down, and Cabo was in the horizon. You could see all the lights of the city and all that. And behind us was them. And I stopped the vehicle, and I said to my daughters, "Look behind us. What do you see?" We had just spent the entire days there working. And I said, "What do you see?" And I said, "The town." I go, do you see power? Do you see anything?" They go, "No." I go, "Now imagine those parents. There's no doors. There's no windows. It's just steel and cardboard and plywood put together for shelter in the middle of the desert. Like, imagine the fear of those parents. Imagine, that when you look at human trafficking, you look at, I can keep going on here, but the fear, and that made them understand that, and that's why we did these things, and even today, like you're still challenging with children because you, again, going back to that inmate asking me, how did you get out? I had a strong foundation, right? We had a lot of love. We had a good family. To this day, we're still very strong unity. You have your up and downs of family throughout the years, but we're still there for each other regardless, right? And that's so important. And that trusting love, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And a lot of that distress is we don't know what price we have to pay for whatever you have in those bags. And it might be too high for us. And I am in a lot of adoptee groups, a lot of US adoptee groups. And there's a lot of Vietnamese and Korean, right, adoptees. And a lot of these parents that adopt, they don't do it for the correct reason, right? And a lot of us, not myself included, my parents, right, the ones that adopted me, never sexually abused me, ever, ever. But a lot of these adoptees were brought in by military family, U.S. military family, and the father had this thing for Asian women, and the mothers knew, and they turned a blind eye, and a lot of adoption, a lot of these churches that are doing a lot of work, and it looks pretty from the outside, but the backstory is atrocious. I just met a woman that's here in Panama. She's a U.S. adoptee from Korea. She has three parents. The parents that adopted her abused her, so she got put into care. She got adopted by a second mother that ended up killing herself, and then and abused by her husband. And then she, got adopted a third time, and she doesn't have a relationship with them because, it just wasn't any good. Her father, I think she told me he either just got out recently from prison or is still in prison. And so a lot of these people that hide behind wanting to do good, there's always a price tag to it. Always,
The movie Sound of Freedom, if you listen to the individual I spoke of a moment ago, the boots on the ground, the ex-CIA, the mercenary type individuals, when they openly state that the U.S. government is fully aware of, for example, all the Mexican children going through the borders are being given to American families. And one of the interviews, he's talking and he'll say, like, there is just like 3, 4, 5-year-olds are showing up at the border with nobody other than a piece of paper and a tag and telling the American government. And the American government gets on the phone and call John in California somewhere and say, we have Manuel Rodriguez Hospital, whatever, here for you. Oh, yeah, this is a family. And they go through minimal anything and they get shipped to these families. And they say, this is happening day in, day out, by the thousands. And he goes, they're fully aware of the human trafficking. They're fully aware of the dismemberment. And a lot of these children go from point A, they end up in a container somewhere. They end up, I remember watching this years ago on a 60-minute episode. And it was all these women that were stolen, and they were in these oil fields in the middle of between India and I guess the Arab countries, and they were found in these trailers and opiumed up and tied. But they had been there since they were 12, 13, 14. They were now in their 40s, and a lot of them, I know, and these women were being trained as motel maids at the time, and because they're in their 40s and 50s now, and they had been there for like 30 years, and again the same thing, like so. That whole grooming and trafficking and what you just said a moment ago, people, it looks good, right? They have the whether it's church or the governance and et cetera, and it looks good, but what's happening, and there's a lot of people that know this, they're fully aware, right? And it's such a ginormous industry, whatever thing that frustrates me about that is like the second biggest industry in the world. But yet, like in Canada, for example, they'll track a $5 that somebody donated to somebody on a freedom convoy, or they'll track. We have the best tracking system in airports and all this kind of stuff, but you can't track the second biggest human trafficking industry for body parts in the world. Like
You know,
you can't stop what you just discussed.
Gene, that what you said there is a mouthful, right? So you are a Canadian family, you adopt a child and bring them from wherever, right? There's no follow up. There's no follow up. Nobody does house visits to make sure, XYZ PDQ is taken care of, and that there's the cultural differences are understood. There's no training, there's no nothing. All it is money. The child goes to the highest bidder, and then after that, nobody knows anything about them. They adopt children from Ethiopia, they adopt children from Panama, from Colombia, Brazil, whatever, and there's no follow up. For example, I I am a U.S. adoptee, but my parents never did my paperwork, so I have no citizenship in the U.S. Right? There's children from Ethiopia. Every November, I post as many stories as I can of adoptees that, get adopted. And there's no requirement on the parents. There's an Ethiopian child that got adopted. We're so hungry that we hoard. When we see a lot of food in a North American's house, we think we got to get some of this because it's gonna run out, because that's what we've lived. And so we do stuff like that. And to a northerner, that doesn't make sense. So they get frustrated with us. We overeat. We might act out our sexual abuse. I have a friend that reached out to me in 2009, right after I was adopted. I like this boy. And you know what I said to him? Show me your penis. That's what I said to him. As a 9, 10-year-old child, I liked him, so I wanted to see his penis. And after he reached out to me, it's our little joke, today in our 50s. But those are the things that adopted children and that children that come with these traumas bring to the table. And there's no follow up, there's no tracking, there's nothing, absolutely nothing. And
There's a couple of things.
if
Go
you
ahead.
go to a church, or if you belong to a missionary, the orphanage that I was at, it's huge. It's huge worldwide. And I have tried to work with a couple people to expose them. And when the people find out the name of the orphanage, they step away quickly. I mean,
You
it's
know,
not Tom, Dick, or Harry orphanage. It's a huge orphanage. It's a huge NGO. I don't know if they're considered an NGO, but it's a name that's recognized worldwide.
you mentioned something a moment ago about food and that, and even if there was follow up, and even if there was, here you went from, this child went from bounced around from different abusing, right? Now they have a steady house in a beautiful neighborhood and food on the table and that kind of stuff. Even if they were abused, they probably keep their mouth quiet, right? Because that's the better of, right?
Exactly.
It's
I've been doing this
oh,
all my life, and I'll exchange this to have a parent, to have nice house, electricity, water, and food. That's my
yeah.
that's my price. That's my price.
And
Yeah.
it's no, absolutely. Like it just resonates, and that's why these conversations are important to have, and this is why, like, when I this conversation was prompted on something that I had posted, and you had put a comment on my post, and it was a Facebook post, and it sparked this conversation, and it threw me back to when we were in Panama, and it put me through my lifetime of work. Like, I used to be a deputy of operations in a detention center, and you would call it deputy warden, for example, where I would run institutions. And again, I worked with young offenders, female, male, a whole bunch of different types of settings and inmates. And working with the young offenders, you always toured with several officers. You never toured alone. And you would see that in the young girls. And when you mentioned about show me your penis, you would see the way they would behave because I was a man. because and you could, like, you would tell them to close their legs. You would tell them, like, even though they had boxers, they would position their boxers to expose themselves, and you would tell them to close their legs. But that's how they knew, right? That's what they knew, that that's what I got to do to get a favor. That's what I got to do to get extra privilege. That's what I got to do to, right? And it's sad, but that's the reality of it, because that's, remember, going back to, I had a strong foundation, a loving family, right? Though, if that's all they knew, if they bounced around. I had a friend of mine that used to do a lot of the bringing in. They're not orphanage children, but they're kind of, they hold children for orphanages, that kind of stuff. And in Ottawa here, and I remember driving with him. He was a correctional officer, and he would tell me some of the children they would get, and how damaged, I guess, and they had to work with them, and they had a few children, and they're a loving couple. They're a beautiful couple, and it's a very beautiful family. And anyways, they they're good souls, and they would tell me, he would tell me about things about the children that they would get. And there's I won't mention a name. I work with this young offender who used to sleep on his cell door, and the staff would get upset because when they looked down the window, looking down into the cell, they couldn't see him. And he would keep his chicken bones. He would keep all his bones. But then, I would go back to the file and read the file. Well, this inmate who graduated to become an adult inmate, etc., he was an American inmate that ended up a Canadian inmate, a young offender. Well, he was basically anally raped by his father growing up, and then went through abuse. And that's why he would sleep on the cell door, because he learned to sleep against the door. So when the door would open, he would jump up. He would fight back.
I wanna jump in now with that in my case. So, we went up to upstate New York. My father was stationed at Romulus, Seneca Army Depot. That closed down, and then they were transferred up to Watertown. That's about 2.5 hours away from there. I stayed living in that area. My dad, one Thanksgiving, that's at the end of November, said, "Hey, Pumpkin, I'm going to come down and stay at your place if it's okay with you, because I want to get up and go hunting the next day." Sure, Dad. Didn't think twice about it. We got back to Geneva, the town I was living in. We got into the apartment. I had one of those metal beds that, you like close like this, and then you put the arms down on both sides. I opened it up, fixed it up for him, went in there, went into my room with Vanessa. Her crib was in the room with me. And as soon as I shut the door, I started having a panic attack, because I wanted to go shower, but I was afraid to undress and go shower. And I was afraid that he might do something to Vanessa too. So I stayed fully dressed, Vanessa in her infant carrier, and I laid up against the door, and I had the carrier next to me, so that if he opened the door, I was fully dressed, prosthetic leg and everything on, so that I could either jump out the window or fight. Because I wasn't going to let him do anything to her. This man he kisses me on my forehead. He's never touched me, but there is something that a man that is my father's age group, I cannot be alone in the house with him. I go into straight panic mode. Also, my chicken bones, I used to save those too, because if there wasn't anything, I could chew on those.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he would do. This inmate, this young offender, he would jump up and fight, and they thought he was aggressive and all that. But when you read the files, it absolutely made sense, right? That's, he would sleep against his bedroom door, right?
Yeah.
And that was ingrained in him. That's the human instinct, and called the animal instinct, call it, right? Survival instinct. That's what that was. He grew up to fight back, right?
Yep.
And I would literally walk into his cell and sit right beside him on the bed and talk to him, right? And then I had 2, 3 staff there with me. and have the conversation because when I read the file, I knew that he's not an aggressive person. He was just, let's just say he programmed himself that way, right? His survival instinct. Yeah, self-preservation. It's exactly what transpired there. And then when you work with those individuals and you see it enough, and that's why, we brought our daughters to these things around the world, and for them to see and understand, right? To be blessed with what you have in life, but also to to give back through life and all these things that are important, but also to open your eyes, right? And that's why
Yeah.
these producers of Sound of Freedom, for example, like nobody want like they did everything to tarnish this movie, this producer, and the actors and the CIA agents, and because it's such an industry, right? And whether you're selling pop or whether they're selling children, to them it's money, right? And you, how dare you interfere with our multi-billion trillion dollar industry, right? And
But it,
that's what that is. How dare you interfere with my addiction? How dare you interfere with?
and it tells you what level this is at. This is at the head. This is at the head. You know, it's not people like you and me. These are people with a ton of money that are doing this. They bullied. They didn't play it. They said the movie wasn't playing and this and that. Who would be against educating people on stuff like this? People that are doing it. You know,
100%,
it's just like the Epstein list. Where is that?
100%, right? 100%, and it is at the head. And like you talk about large organizations and all that, and at minimum, who would stop that? Why would you want to interfere with that? But and especially when you have boots on the ground people that were professionals, people that were acclaimed, people that were, like in the last several years, people that Nobel Peace Prizes or diplomas after diplomas or acclamation after acclamation, all of a sudden they're bad, right? All of a sudden because they're highlighting the obvious, right? And I tell people, how does it get to become the second biggest industry in the world? How? Right? You can track everything. You listen to all devices. They listen to all their electronic devices. They listen to everything, right? They track all your transportation. They track all your travel. They track everything. But somehow you miss the second biggest, largest industry in the world, which is criminal activities, which is the dismemberment and trafficking of body parts, which is these like that movie, those boots on the ground, is called The Red Door, and they talk about the Haiti earthquake, which I knew a woman that her mother died in that earthquake. That earthquake, 10 years later, they did an extraction, and he talks about one of the child that they pulled out, which had been there for 10 years, and they were not only basically sexual breeding machines, they were selling those children and body parts, etc. The first thing out of her mouth when they extracted her and they was, "Do I still have hope?" And that child, that is because of poverty. That was something that probably her grandmother or mother talked about growing up. Her father, we have hope. We're going to get out of poverty. That was the first thing out of her mouth. Do I still have hope? Right? And so these individuals that highlight this get tarnished. Right? They get, just like you mentioned earlier at the beginning of this conversation. You come back from a weekend from at the foster home, and you bring it up to the foster. This was transpired to me, and you get tarnished. The children get tarnished. The children get disciplined. Right?
And just like in that movie, 2023, here in Panama, prostitution is legal. So they have prostitution tourism. And in that prostitution tourism, we have children that is being sold. When I first came back to Panama in 2000, I came back in 2006. In 2007 or 8, there was a case in the news that made me sick to my stomach. There were two drug addicts. One of them was a father. The other one was just a drug addict. They were literally fighting on national news here in Panama about which one of them killed the 8-year-old girl. The father said, "When I gave her to you, she was alive." The one that bought the girl said, "When I gave her back to you after I had sex with her up in the mountain, she was still alive, but the child is dead." Can you imagine? I mean,
It's surreal, right? It's surreal, just like everything that's transpiring today. Like in Ontario, where I live right now, they made it now. Even if you are sexual predator charge, etc., you can still practice law. They just pass like it's surreal. I know it's surreal. It's like a lot of these things that are transpiring in elementary school and the type of education and books and that in Canada and US, you would swear there's one person on top commanding everything, which there is obviously, because it's the exact same thing transpiring everywhere. It's surreal, but somehow if you bring it up, you're either a right wing or you're tarnished or you're all that stuff, right? Um, no, I really appreciate this conversation, and that's why I thought it was very important to have it with you because you're speaking from knowledge. You're speaking, in the Occupational Health and Safety Act in Ontario. I worked as an investigator and as an inspector, Minister of Labor. Is competency is defined as knowledge, training, and experience, right? And that's why when I the not only did you grow up in that world, you give back to that world. You help those children. And you can speak from knowledge. You can speak from experience. You can speak uh, tangibly, right? And that's why it was so important for me to reach out to you and ask you, would you want to have this conversation with me?
yeah, when I came back to Panama, I wanted to find the girls I was in an orphanage with. And, I figured if I knew about this problem and didn't do anything, I was just as guilty as the people that perpetrate these things against these children. Um, so I went back and I had strict instructions. When I was there, the Americans would bring up so much donation, and then the orphanage would have their vehicle, a van, a white van. I'll never forget the color of it or the size of it. A white van come and take take all of the donations that was sent to us at Christmas time. We had sponsors in the US and Canada. They would send boxes of things. They would take pictures with us next to the boxes, and then the boxes would go and they would be taken away. Um, and I think in the last, 5 or 6 years, there was a big hoopla here in Panama about some girls that were in an orphanage, not the one that I was at, that I took you to when you were here. They escaped, and it was a group of them, and they stuck together, and they were drugged through the mud and whatever. But the government had to take action because it wasn't that they went to the people in the orphanage. They got a hold of a woman that's a newscaster here in Panama and told them the story. You should see how many orphanages, including the one I took you to, that shut down like that
Yeah.
overnight. Shut down.
Hmm. I know, and how dare they, right? How dare they highlight that? How dare they bring that up? And it's it's cut world, right? And and then you and there's so much money. Like if you really looked at it, if you there is industries that have so much money, and all that money comes from the people through laws of extraction for revenue generation. It all comes from the people. And if they were to manage that money properly, if they were to have true intent, right? And a lot of the individuals do have true intent, I'm going to tell you there's an overwhelming majority have true intent, but there is this minority that through intimidation, through my father served World War II, and he taught me a lot of things in life, and how people hide behind paychecks, how people hide behind pension benefits and salaries, right? And they we all saw it in the last 3 years, right? People just hide behind paychecks and turn a blind eye to things, and because they don't want to lose their jobs or their security or whichever, right? And that's the world we live in. Whether it doesn't matter what it is, they hide behind their paychecks.
Exactly. And I understand that because they have to take care of their family or whatever, but it's up to us not to have shame. And it's up to us that have been there, that have skin in the game, to say something. Because if we don't say anything, it's just going to continue. And at least if I leave this earth tomorrow for whatever reason, I can go and I can say, well, I tried to improve at least this, or I tried to leave this better. Um, but a lot of people, my biological sister, my mother, she has a lot of shame, and she would never come out and speak about, our dirty little secrets. And unfortunately, unless we're willing to speak out, stand up, it's going to continue, and
I
it's
really
it's it's a snowboard. It's going to snowball out of hand, because now things are so much easier to do, to get. Everything is at a click away, and it's just going to get worse.
and that's why I'm so happy that you did bring it up, and that you said something here, and I always tell people I've made it my duty to teach while I continuously learn, right? And that's why this conversation is important, and that's why putting this out there and educating the world, like, and you talked about America, you talked about Panama, you talked about the different countries from Ethiopia and so forth. But it is a world problem right now. What's going on in Gaza, right now, what's going on? They're stealing children. That whether it's a tsunami, whether it's an earthquake, they're going in and stealing children. That's a huge, and they have the second biggest bank account in the world. So they have all the money to travel and to load up planes and private planes and the whole nine yard, right? Um,
Yeah,
but
it's
I,
the US did that with Vietnam. They did it with Korea. They swooped in with a big plane with a bunch of bassinets, and they left and went back to the US. And three-quarters of those kids don't even have a birth certificate. The woman that I just met from Korea here in Panama, she had such a difficult time doing her paperwork for her citizenship, because Korea doesn't have a birth certificate on her. The US doesn't have a birth certificate on her. It was just, oh, it was war, or it was this, or it was that. And then, these people with all of this money and all of this power, they come in and they want to bring fresh children in. And it
and
does,
that's the
it does,
system,
they don't, yeah,
and
and
that's
you don't
uh,
have paperwork. You don't have to have
think about
paperwork.
that.
All you
Think
have,
about that. That the system brings you in, and you don't have paperwork,
yeah,
right? Like what's happening in the Mexican border right now. That is managed by the system, right?
mhm.
They made a movie about it, and it's still going on. Those individuals, why they made the movie? Because nothing was being done about it, right? And that's why they made the movie, and that's why the CEO Goya got involved in that, because nothing was being done about it.
Exactly. We had a movie also, Blue Bayou, by Justin Chang, about the adoptions. Just like you said, there is a lot of adoptees from Mexico that were just waved through. And fast forward to 2023, everybody is cracking down on everything because of 9/11, because of this, because of that. And now they don't have paperwork. Why? Because they made it so easy to bring these children in, because somebody up there knew that there was a need. So they turn the blind eye. All these children come in, and then, nobody's accountable for anything. Nobody does anything. Nobody knows anything. And we're just a commodity.
We are a commodity. We're a barcode. No,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time tonight, Anita. And I want to wrap this up by thanking you, and thanking you for what you did, what you do, right? Because you're right. Some people do turn a blind eye, and we talked about that. And some people don't want to bring it up, and some people leave their past behind. But that there was children there that needed help, and that needed, and that's why, and you know, and that's why I'm doing this video. I want to put it out there. That's why me and Liz brought the girls to things around the world, and we've done different things around the world, and I hope to live 100 years to continue. Right? It's my life mission to teach, right? To teach on whether it's health or whether it's this.
I was very honored to meet you guys, and to see, the genuine interest. And not only that, my daughter was never in agreement to come to Panama. But now she's 31 and she's like, these people don't know how good they have it. And that statement, when she said it to me, I thought about you and Liz. I didn't have the ability to do what you guys did. I did it in a different way, but the outcome is the same, right?
Same.
They have to wake up and they have to know that everything is not, you know, pink colored and fuzzy bunnies and, you know, so I wish a little, yeah, a little more parents would be like you guys and would be like, you guys have a nice house, you guys have this, you guys have that, but the other side of the coin is this, because that is what is going to take to change anything. And at least, you guys did your little grains of sand. And, I hope I can do my grain of sand too. And I'm grateful for any opportunity that I have to talk on this, to expose it, and to try to help to bring, something better for the next set of orphanages, the next set of orphans that are coming up.
Thank you. Thank you again for all that you do. Big,
You're welcome.
healthy, loving hugs. And
Like,
I hope to get to sit down together again and break bread together again. And I thank you again for this conversation. It's so like it's an emotional conversation, but I thank you for that.
you're welcome, and you have a fantastic night. Say hello to your girls and to your wife.
I will. Thank you. And then the same big hugs to all of you.
I thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Anissa.